Hi everybody, and welcome to today's Recovery from Relapse meeting. Today is Tuesday, the 25th of February, 2025, and we are delighted to have Rick J, all the way from North Carolina, who'll be sharing his experience, strength, and hope with us. Rick began his journey in Overeat Anonymous in 1995, and Rick, it's over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alan. My name is Rick J, and I say I am a recovered compulsive overeater. I am from North Carolina, and I say recovered because I have been recovered. I am recovered from a seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body, but I'm not cured. I'm not cured. I'll never be cured of the physical allergy. If I ingest certain foods, ingredients, behaviors, then it triggers something within me that I'm powerless over. But today, one day at a time, my connection with my higher power is stronger than my mental obsession. So as Alan mentioned, I began my journey back in the mid 90s, about 30 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. I am also I got sober in AA back in 1987, and it's funny, once I started getting sober and started gaining weight, I was very thin, and I I began eating. It's like I had traded one addiction for the other, and compulsive eating was my very first addiction. So back when I was about 6 years old, I discovered food as a way to give me ease and comfort in a way that I could not provide for myself. I lived in a world of fear. My mom had been hospitalized after a catastrophic nervous breakdown that affected the whole family, and she was hospitalized for, in and out for up to like a year at a time. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and and I just lived in fear, and I had just started the first grade, and I did not know how to connect with the people around me. Um, and I discovered food. I discovered a jar of mayonnaise of all things. And as I was eating this jar of mayonnaise, it wasn't really anything about the taste of it or anything else. It was this act of eating it was giving me this sense of ease and comfort. It took me out of my fear just for a little bit, and I started looking for other ways to find that ease and comfort with other foods. And as I got older, and my mom, was released, and she, with medication and a lot of help, she was able to function in this world. But I was not. And there's no blame here. It's just that a part of me was always unable to connect with life or going on around me. For me, it was always like people out there, and me separate. I never felt a part of. I never did. And I started looking, constantly for the ways that I could feed that hole in my soul, to connect, to do something that would make me feel somewhat okay. And, I discovered alcohol and drugs, and it got me where I needed to go quicker. But the consequences were becoming more and more severe. And I ultimately, found my way into 12-step programs, when I got sober. And when my eating became, more obsessive, in sobriety, um, someone had actually noticed it, a friend of mine, and they said, there is Overeaters Anonymous. You might just want to try that. And so I started going, and and I really was, I guess, skeptical, a little cynical, arrogant, egotistical, when I first came into the rooms of Overeaters Anonymous. Um, I just didn't know that I didn't know. And I will say now I know I don't know. So maybe that's my spiritual progress I'll claim. It's just now I know I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Back then I didn't even know I didn't know. I was completely clueless. And I was in that period of time, even in AA, I was a steps on the wall kind of guy. Um, you know, we read the steps this morning, and at the beginning of the meeting this morning here anyway. And that's kind of how I work my program. Yep, I admit I'm powerless. Yep, a higher power is going to restore me to sanity. Okay, I'll turn my life and my will over. I'll make that decision. And I did do some fourth step inventory work, but it wasn't like it was outlined in the big book. I had a sponsor who was not really in the big book either. I did not like the big book. I thought it was way too restrictive and just too much stuff in there. I could handle just these 12 sentences, which is, basically for me, it's like a book, and just, reading the title of the chapters in the book and saying you read the book. And that does not work. I was not living in a spiritual program of action. But I did just enough to not drink. And that's the one thing I can say. I didn't have a drink in a certain amount of time. And all my friends were in recovery, and my wife is in recovery. And that's probably the only reason why I didn't drink, quite frankly. But this is about Overeaters Anonymous. And, as much as, to the extent that I was not working truly a big book spiritual program of action in, one 12-step program, I was carrying that same attitude into Overeaters Anonymous, and yet still arrogant enough to believe that I knew more about recovery and the 12 steps than the people around me. Well, it's no surprise that I just kept bouncing in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Um, and I found a meeting. Um, it was a Vision for You meeting, that was a face-to-face meeting, but that's the name of their group, was a Vision for You. And when I went there, they were all about the big book, and they started talking about, this this weekly meeting, a phone meeting, a Vision for You, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Um, and so through that meeting in Overeaters Anonymous, I actually started getting more and more into the big book than I ever had before in my life. And um, I fell in love with the big book. I really did. And I realized that, recovery, true recovery and spiritual transformation comes from living in the actions called out in the book, not just reading, sentences on the wall, but actually living, per the instructions that's, very clearly outlined in there. And I got big book sponsors, and I started participating in the call-in Vision for You meeting, and started doing service work. And I felt myself transforming, and I started going back through, my old, the inventories. And for example, um, when I had done a previous inventory, my mother was on there as a resentment, and I blamed her for ruining my life. That's as far as I could go with what I had to work with at the time. Is I just blamed my mother. I had this resentment. Look what she did to me. Look at what she did to my sister, my family. Um, I did not do that fourth column. In my mind, I didn't do anything. I was a victim. And it was a real paradigm shift for me to look at this fourth column and see my mistakes, my selfishness in keeping her at arm's length, not letting her come back to me as the mother she so desperately wanted to be when she started getting well, and wanting to connect with her family. And I knew that, and I wouldn't let her. I wouldn't let her come in. I wouldn't let her get close. So when I was actually acknowledging that, when I was going back through and I was really doing a deep dive into fourth column work, I realized how much damage I had done to my mother, and it was just heartbreaking for me to realize that, you know, I was capable of doing that, and then and blinded by, you know, just blinded to that. Again, I didn't know that I didn't know. And my mother now, you know, she has dementia, and she, you know, she's in assisted living. And at the time that, you know, I was going through this again, I was talking with my sponsor, and, you know, and we agreed that me, you know, doing an amends on what I'd done would be confusing to her, and it could do harm to her. And so I wrote a long letter to her, you know, telling her how much I loved her and what a wonderful mother she was. And I wrote this letter and I read it to my sponsor, and then I live in, you know, in the living amends where I just get to show up as her son. Um, so that's kind of a backdrop of where I had started transforming into my previous way of working the 12 steps, both, you know, both 12-step programs, uh, you know, into embracing and living in the spiritual program of action, you know, from the doctor's opinion all the way through. So in 19, sorry, in 2023, in January of 2023, I had gone to an ear, nose, and throat specialist to check out a blockage in my ear canal. And, you know, the pressure kept building up in my head, and I was getting ready to fly to Los Angeles for the big LAOA birthday party. And I was flying out the next day, and this was, you know, the only time I was able to make the appointment, and that was a 3 weeks, you know, of waiting to get in. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, they'll just clear this out, whatever it is. There might be some sort of blockage in there, and the ENT will just, you know, fix it, and I can fly. And um, he discovered um, some lumps, you know, in my nymph gland, and there was, he also scoped me, and there was a very large tumor, you know, back in the center of my head, and then one that was right on my carotid artery. And I found out I had lymphoma. And you know, the next day, you know, I'm flying to Los Angeles. Now he did insert a little tube in my ear to relieve the pressure, but when I went to LA, you know, it was you know, I would be seeing the oncologist and starting treatment when I got back. And I say my relapse from after 4 years of abstinence began on the flight to LA. Um, I was pretty freaked out about it. I talked to my wife, and I was just in shock, you know. And it was originally diagnosed as an extremely aggressive type of lymphoma that's very hard to treat. And so when I was on the flight, um, I don't usually fly business class, but I had a lot of frequent flyer miles. And, you know, when I booked the trip, I thought, you know what, I'll just treat myself. And it was just this nice sort of, you know, very comfortable trip. And I felt like that, you know, I was being kind of cared for, which was nice because of the state of mind I was in, my emotional state. It was nice to have a little bit of extra tender loving care, you know, be, you know, having, you know, more attention. And one of the things that happened was the flight attendant had a bowl, a little warm bowl like mixed nuts, and they were nice and warm, and I can't eat that stuff. It triggers me. And and in my mind, I was just, I was getting ready to say, "Oh, thanks so much. No, no thanks." And instead, I just said thank you. And I'm like, you know what? I've got cancer. I deserve this. And so I ate these warm mixed nuts, and
15 minutes.
I did not talk to my sponsor about this. And I actually, was at the LA birthday party, and I was I was participating in a couple, I was on a panel here and there, and in my ego and my, it was like, I deserve this. I don't have to talk about every little thing, unless you've gone through this. Well, I actually met Rita at this conference, and as well as Hillary, and you know I know that Rita's been through a lot more than I have, and but I didn't really connect the dots between my shift in thinking and what I had heard her share, her experience, strength, and hope there. And so I started doing other little things, like and my father died right in the middle of chemo, and I was a mess. I mean, my brains were scrambled. I mean, they were giving me an extremely potent dose of chemo, and I was given the eulogy, and just an emotional, physical wreck. And we went out to eat at my father's favorite place. It's called My Father's Pizza, and to celebrate my father's life, I'll have some pizza. And now this is another thing that I cannot eat. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll just have two slices, and that'll be it. And then, six pieces later, I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going through chemo. My father just died. I don't really need to justify this. So what was happening was I was becoming more and more dishonest, through the admission of, not bringing this up with my sponsor and justifying this in my mind, knowing everything that I know about relapse, and it finally came to the point in July um, of 2023. We were on vacation with some dear friends of ours, and and going through chemo, I'd have these salt cravings, and again, instead of talking to my sponsor and coming up with something that would be a good alternative for me that wouldn't trigger me, um, I just took care of it on my own. And again, I'm like, I don't need to be talking about this. So it was basically pretzels, and then the whole bag of pretzels, and then a whole bag of chips, and then a whole can of mixed nuts. And and in my mind, that dishonesty was so prevalent that I was not seeing my own disconnect. And I wasn't into sugar. I wasn't like binge eating meals. But in that particular instance, that night, I had a moment of clarity. And on that particular event, that little mini binge, I realized that I could no longer truly call myself abstinent. I was sponsoring people. I was doing service work on A Vision for You. In fact, this was July 30th. And in the month of August, I had signed up to be a moderator, which requires a year of abstinence. And it just suddenly hit me that I had, my dishonesty had disconnected me from my higher power, and my self-will was starting to run riot. And that selfishness and that self-centeredness, that, you know, that me running the show, um, you know, was consuming me. And I did not see it until that moment. I called my sponsor. I called some fellows, and we agreed that I needed to reset my abstinent date. And I didn't want to. And my ego was, no, Rick J doesn't relapse, whatever bullshit that I was telling myself, that was my first thought. And, you know, and then my second thought after I paused and asked for some help was, am I willing to go to any length to recover? If I have decided that I want what the people around me have who have recovery has, then I have to be willing to go to any length, including the honesty and the humility, not the humiliation, but the humility of being honest and vulnerable. And I contacted Leah, you know, um, who arranges the moderators and schedules them, and I had to tell her that I could not moderate a vision for you in August because I did not have a year of abstinence. So, and I told my sponsees, which that was the hardest of all. I was at work when I made the call to my two sponsees, and afterwards I went into the bathroom and I just wept. I just wept. That was the hardest thing for me, was with my sponsees, and to tell them that I couldn't sponsor them. And I was met with love and acceptance. In fact, one person who I said I couldn't sponsor, they informed me a little bit later that they actually they were still going to work with me. So I just decided, it's like, well, you're going to sponsor me whether you like it or not. And I'm so grateful for that. It's like in their mind, they wanted to work with me. They wanted to be a part of my life and my recovery, and that meant the world to me. Um, so I went through the 12 steps again, very quickly, but I went through them, and most of my house cleaning, had to do, was all around, the relapse, and a lot of that I'd already taken care of, as far as the, you know, setting things right, the wrongs that I needed to make right. Um, but I really understood too that, it's one thing to say I'm living in 10, 11, and 12, but what does that really mean? And that's where I'm at in my recovery today. And I've been abstinent since July, uh, total abstinence since July 31st of 2023. Um, and for me, living in the steps, you know, I don't think of it as, okay, now I'm going to work step, 10 and making, I just live in the steps. I just live in that, where I have my routine of prayer, meditation. I do the nightly review. Full disclosure, a lot of times that nightly review is in the morning because I seem to have a better rear view mirror, look at the day the following morning. I can see things a little more clearly. But what I do is when I answer those questions in that nightly review, I'm looking at my corrective measures, and it tells us that, um, after making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and we inquire what corrective measures should be made. And the corrective measures for me, it's right there in my answers, like, is there, if I kept something to myself that should be discussed with another person at once, was I kind and loving toward all? Do I know an apology? I mean, when I'm looking at those, that's where I'm taking this forward into my day. The corrective measures is where the spiritual transformation keeps coming. It's the courage to change the things I can in the serenity prayer. And then I can, like, I love to pause throughout the day. And I don't have to just pause when I'm agitated or doubtful. I can just pause and say, thank you, God, for my life exactly the way it is. But sometimes I'll have a pause thing, like it might be right with the corrective measures. And my daughter has an extreme eating disorder. She has anorexia, and she's been through 2-month-long residential treatment centers and about a month in a psychiatric hospital. About, yeah, a little less than that, and for suicidation and attempted overdose. And she's 22 years old. And if we've had a particularly rough day, I can bring my, that extra whatever I need, for, just to pause and pray for her. And how can I show up as her father? And, so
5 minutes.
it gives me the tools to stay connected, to release the things that are blocking me. That paragraph about step 10, we do this house cleaning. Once we've admitted we're powerless, and we know we're powerless and our lives are unmanageable, and then the only place to go from there is a power greater than ourselves. It makes perfect sense. And then if I am have this belief system that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity, then I have to connect to that power. I have to make a decision to do the actions that are in this book, to turn my will and my life completely over to the care of God as I understand God. Thank God that it's as I understand Him. And then, next we launch out on that house cleaning, that 4 through 9 house cleaning, which we get to continue on in step 10. And the promises that are, that come with working these steps, to me, the promises are simply descriptions of transformation. And, the traditional step 9 promises, we now know a new freedom and a new happiness all the way through. We suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And then the neutrality promises, where I live in neutrality. These are contingent upon me doing the work and doing the actions. And the one paragraph that I try to read every single day is this one on page 85. It is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol, compulsive eating is a subtle foe. I am not cured. I am not cured of compulsive eating. Never will be. All I have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. I substitute the word connection for condition because that makes it a little bit more specific and clear to me. I have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual connection, the actions that I need to do to stay connected to my higher power and the people in my life. Every day is a day when I must carry the vision of God's will into all of my activities. Every person is a person who I must carry the vision of God's will to in all of my interactions. Now, I can never do that perfectly, but that's my direction. That's my compass heading. That's where I want to go. That's what I'm trying for. Thank you. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And, and so for me, it's all about release and connection. That's what this spiritual program of action is to me. It's about releasing that which blocks me from the power which will transform me, and connecting to that power stronger, and connecting to the people in my life, carrying this message to others. And pausing for me is the ultimate adventure. It's easy for me to have this quiet time in the morning and, and that at night, it's like my little Zen spiritual sparkly bubble that I'm in. And I need that. I need that alone time with my higher power. But, the adventure of life is, out there. As soon as I come in contact with the first human being, that's the adventure of life beginning right there. It doesn't matter where I'm at. So that's why pausing is so important. And the pause promises, that's what I call them. We pause throughout the day when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. Then the good stuff, right? Then I'm in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, foolish decisions. I'm more efficient. So if I'm doing this pausing, I do not need to be doing 10 steps all day. You know, I'm living in this combination of step 10 and 11 where I'm releasing and I'm connecting. And some of the time, you know, when I'm pausing, you know, before that agitation can, you know, go into resentment or rage, or the doubt could come into fear or paranoia or whatever. I'm pausing, and a lot, you know, I just pause, you know, and my first thought, which I'm not responsible for, I pause and I ask God for a second thought and a first action that I am responsible for. So thank you all for being here, and I think that's it for me. I pass.